Me and my little team, we are small but mighty, support not just you guys out in Colorado, but also the Nevada and Utah field teams for anything in the realms of GIS, from field support like we'll be talking about today, along with reporting products, like the stuff that happens after all the hard field work is in progress or complete. Today, we will be focusing on one of the main GIS products we use in our field data collection, which is ArcGIS field maps. To get started, this is kind of an overview of what this presentation will contain. In regards to the field maps, we'll be going over what it is, all the various buttons and tools inside it, how our company uses it for data collection, and then also more region-specific stuff that is focused on Colorado, like becoming more aware of what those regional standards might be, and everyone's beloved favorite, which is troubleshooting in the field, because your technology always behaves 100% appropriately all the time, don't it? We'll be going over that whole kit and caboodle of all these different topics. Before I get rolling, a couple of quick terms that I want to define at the start. You'll likely hear me say them several times. First off is, of course, GIS. This has two meanings. We have the field or discipline, which is geospatial information science. That's what we do. And then also you have the people. A lot of folk in our company will refer to talking to GIS. That's folk like me. Me and my team are one of several that support the entire Chronicle Heritage Company, everywhere from West Coast, East Coast, and international. I and two other team members are, of course, your Mountain Kingdom team, but there are many others like us all lurking behind our computer screens and supporting your work. Geospatial is another phrase you'll probably hear throughout this presentation. It just refers to data that's related to or derived from locational information. It's the mapping component, the spatial analysis, all the bits and bobs that we do when you actually go out and record information about a place you're visiting. Esri is another one. They are the software company and kind of quasi-GIS overlord, where they're a predominant company that has created a ton of GIS softwares, both mobile and desktop. And they're the ones who have created, design, and support the field maps application we're going to be talking about. You may also already know the term collector or hear it used interchangeably with field maps. This is just Esri's precursor app to field maps. They deprecated it about a year and a half ago. So some folk within our company still just say collector when they mean field maps. They're pretty much the same thing. Field maps is just super powered collector 2.0. What is field maps? First off, it's a mobile app. You can install it on any smart device, and it is an application that's designed to let users collect information about specific points and areas using a map-based interface. It is not a form-style application. To clarify, today we won't be going over any of Chronicle Heritage's form-based data collection like Codify databases or Survey123. Those products are managed by the data services team, so I want to leave all trainings and official know-how to them for additional outreach and support. This one is the specific mapping component. That's what the GIS team is here to help you with, and that's what Field Maps, the app, focuses on. It is a company-wide product, meaning all of our Chronicle Heritage offices use field maps when recording data, also called like spatial data or geospatial stuff, about things like our cultural sites, historic architecture. So if there's a pedestrian survey component, you're going to be using field maps, regardless of where you are in the country. Even the international team, they do have some alternative softwares that they use, but here in the United States, continental and Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, all of it, we're always going to be using field maps for our data collection. This application also allows for simultaneous workflows. That just means multiple users can be working on the same project, viewing, creating, editing data all together at the same time without any issue. The app can run online and offline. And let's be real, we're in fieldwork, so it's pretty much always offline, but it does have both capabilities. That's like the number one question if folk have never used field maps, like, will it work when I'm out in a mountain ridge or out in the desert? Yes, it will. And we'll go over how that happens. Well, that's all about the application, but how do we actually use it within our company? A lot of this may be familiar to you, but some basics of how we use our GIS field maps to support our industry. In CRM, we're using this kind of platform to identify, record, and preserve cultural resources. And to do that, we need to know where they are. ArcGIS Field Maps is a tool that lets our staff reference and record cultural data in the field. And that can be a lot of things. It can be everything from reviewing SHPO data when you're trying to go relocate a site. It can be recording new features, site boundaries, disturbances, and then putting in a request to have those turned into formal reporting products like sketch maps, ROS maps, data packages, which in turn becomes somebody else's SHPO data cut to prep for their fieldwork. So it's this entire cycle that we utilize ArcGIS Field Maps to start, review, and just continue on the beautiful cycle of GIS life in associated with our cultural projects and paleontology projects. In this section, we'll go over a summary of what the app is, but what are the buttons? where do I find the functions that I actually need to do the thing I'm supposed to do? These next slides will go over introducing you to the app interface and how to find the tools that you'll be needing. Here on this slide, on the right hand, you can see all these screenshots were taken within an iPad or an Apple device, so that way it should look pretty darn similar to what you're going to be using in the field. Here, a quick list of main functions, including how to identify like the map name that you're currently in, the interface itself, some key buttons on things like opening layers, accessing your menu, finding your location on the map, all these bits and bobs that will go into more detail. The map interface is your best bud. It is where you're going to be spending most of your time. You can select, zoom to items, pan in and out of your map area. You can drop pins, bookmarks, start collecting data. Everything pretty much starts from the map interface. When you're working in here, you can use the pin drop feature, which pretty much just tap and hold anywhere on the map, and you're going to be able to pull up a menu from that location. You might have a details tab, which is where you can do things like starting to collect data, get directions to that location, activate a compass tool. You can also find like what's here because you're like, I poked it, what layers are actually present at this location to get information about the other data that's already been loaded into your map. All of that is going to be from your map interface. Now for Chronicle Heritage, your map interface is specific to the project. We create a field map set up for each project that we do. When you hop from project to project, the data will be different. It'll include things like your project area, your SHPO data templates for collecting new information. All of that will change from project to project. Also within here, we have two pretty quick and easy tools, Navigator and Compass. The Navigator tool was one of the new features for field maps from Collector, where basically, say you want to just drive to your work site, rather than having to enter a rough location or a lat long into Google Maps, you can open field maps, click it, say navigate here, and it will pull open Apple Maps or Google Maps, so you can just get there. Or say you recorded a point of where you left your vehicle, same thing. The Navigator tool isn't specific to data collection, but it's a handy thing to know about. The Compass tool is, as the name suggests, it's just a built-in compass. So as you rotate your map around, you work in the user interface, you just need to recalibrate and figure out which way is north. The Compass tool is there for you. That's kind of a brief introduction to what the app looks like. But of course, before you go in the field, for any field component, there's always a prep stage. Whether you are assembling your gear, you're reviewing SHPO records, the same is true for GIS. There's going to be a pre-field checklist that you want to go through prior to using this application in the field. These are the steps that you want to take before you're actually out there, which largely means you're still in your safe internet bubble. This can be at your hotel, it can be at the Chronicle office, it can be at home, wherever you're doing your prep. There are some things that do require internet and signal to actually kickstart you towards getting everything to run smoothly. This section, we're going over that little checklist of stuff in order to set up configurations, prepare yourself for going into the field with this application. The first one that we like to highlight is that this app, while it's on an iPad, rarely acts alone. Almost every single office utilizes something called an external receiver. That can be a GPS or GNSS receiver, something like a Garmin, a Trimble unit, SX Blue, a Bad Elf, EOS, or a Juno, some super-powered location device that gives you much better accuracy than your iPad. Your iPad ain't much better than your personal phone, and it's got an accuracy range of like 15, 20 meters. If you're trying to drive down a highway, that's fine. But if you're trying to relocate a lithic scatter or a specific isolate point, that's an entire like transect's worth of distance. That will not cut it for you navigating or you collecting data. These external receivers are a really important part of working with field maps. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that your two devices can talk to each other. Most of these use a Bluetooth connection. So you can go into your iPad settings and just like you're connecting to some Bluetooth headphones or Bluetooth speaker, same deal. Field maps is kind of a possessive buddy. It likes a one-to-one relationship, doesn't want anybody crowding it. So we have had users run into issues when their iPad is paired to multiple devices. The GNSS receiver may get huffy about this and decide to disconnect without warning. This varies from device to device, but we just recommend when you're working in the field and you're using field maps, make sure your iPad is paired to just its one buddy. That way it's all peaceful in the realms of this digital technology relationship and nobody's going to get fussy at each other. This slide kind of goes over, if you're unfamiliar with how to connect to Bluetooth devices, these instructions are here. They're pretty easy to follow, but just make sure that your two buddies are actually talking to each other before you get going. That is the iPad and receiver relationship, but we now have a third buddy who's kind of overseeing their connection, which is the Field Maps app. This is the stage that most people forget to check, and it can have some heartbreaking consequences. So you've confirmed that your devices are connecting, but Field Maps is one app of several on your iPad. Just like you can control your notification settings for apps, you can also affect your location settings in different apps. Once you've paired your device and your iPad, you also need to make sure that Field Maps has given them permission to talk to each other and that Field Maps will respect this new location information. Otherwise, it will default to its own internal GPS. And again, your data quality is kind of kaput. These next slides are all going to be about configuration settings to get the most accurate data you can. And I want to preface, there's a lot of information, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. I will also say, once you set up these configurations, you only have to do it the once. It's saved to your user profile on that iPad. If you do it once before you hit the field, you don't have to worry about doing it again. It can be a hassle, but if you just do it while you're still chilling in air conditioning back at the office, it's no problem. The first thing you want to do is go into your profile, which you can see, it's going to be this little person icon in your top left. That's where all of your profile and configuration settings live. Disclaimer, whenever you open Field Maps, it automatically goes back to the last project you worked on. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. So all you have to do is click this backward maps button to go back to this main menu. But from there, you can access your profile and all your settings. Within these settings, we're going to be looking at how is the information represented to us in Field Maps by looking at the measurement units and coordinate system. These are under general, because again, the whole purpose of this app is to record spatial information, which involves knowing where it is on the Earth and how far it is from other things. You might need to be measuring distances or areas, and you want those pieces of information to be in a unit system that's useful to you. Here's where you can set measurement units if you want it metric or US. And for coordinates, if you want UTMs, lat longs, decimal degrees, all that kind of stuff, you set them from here. These are unique to your user profile as you're in the app. Once you've got those checked out and they're good to go, you go back to your profile. Before we go to other configuration settings, when we're talking about coordinates, everybody kind of knows X, Y, lat, long. We use them all the time in our industry. But what is a coordinate system, as a refresher? Because it seems to come up quite a bit in regards to fieldwork and conversations. A coordinate system is a way that we basically put a grid on the Earth's surface so that we can reference it, like playing tic-tac-toe or finding specific X, Y coordinates. Going back to middle school and high school geometry when you have an X, Y and you've got a dot up here and you're trying to find, is it X3, Y4, all that kind of fun stuff. This is humanity's way of trying to make sense on the Earth and put a map on it. Typically, you have your two axes, your X, which runs east-west, and your Y, or vertical axis, which runs north-south. Since the Earth is a sphere, it cannot be perfectly mapped on a flat surface. This is where projected coordinate systems come in. If a coordinate system is just a grid, a projected coordinate system is a unique way of skewing that surface of the Earth to show a specific grid. Here you can see a couple examples of these are all different projections, and you can see they each skew things in a different way. The most common one and slightly infamous is Mercator, where you can see down here, or even on Robinson, that Antarctica looks huge, or Greenland looks huge, but in reality they are much smaller than some of the continents. So they almost seem misrepresented. Whereas here, watermelon or the Albers, things are more accurately represented, but the distance seems off. Each projection chooses to sacrifice one spatial aspect in favor of another. So you can see each of these grids are going to apply differently. When you have an X and Y, a set of coordinates, and you pull that number from one projection, then you use it in a different projection, those numbers mean entirely different things within the grid. Maybe the X units are a lot closer together, and having an east-west value of 3 is not nearly as far as it is in another grid. These things can lead to all kinds of skews. What's important to know when you're looking at your coordinate system, these are all different grids and how they're going to represent those XY pieces to you. UTMs is actually a type of projected coordinate system. It stands for Universal Transverse Mercator. We more commonly use UTMs to just mean coordinates, the XY points that we're using. But in reality, it's very specifically XY points that we grab from that specific grid. Here in this picture, this is just focused on the continental US, but the UTM system actually covers the entire globe, and it has, I think, 32 different zones, which are what you're seeing here represented in these boundaries. Colorado, for example, most of it falls in UTM zone 13, but a wee bit of it does fall in UTM zone 12. If you have an XY coordinate of, say, 4, 7, that's going to show up differently than if you were to put it into zone 12. That 4, 7 is going to be in a different location. That's the kind of thing that we end up working with in GIS, is when coordinates get mishmashed or data seems wonky. But when it comes to the field work, we still use a lot of UTMs strictly for navigation purposes when we're trying to orient ourselves along a transect or specific line. The UTM system is utilized by the USGS on all of their topographic quadrangle maps. So down here, you can see, for example, you have your decimal degrees, but then you also have these UTM alignments to help orient yourself. If you're, say, looking at your Garmin or you're looking at a quad map and you see your current location is 99 East, if you follow that particular unit, you know you're going in a straight line based on that grid. If you're trying to set a transect, say, every couple of degrees, you can rely on, hey, as long as I'm staying on this particular line, whether it's east, west, north, south, that you're going in alignment with that grid. The UTM is just one grid of many, and it's the baseline default that we use here at Chronicle Heritage. Coordinate systems and projection is one of the things that can be a huge topic and be a very small one. There are some links down here if you're interested in learning more. Definitely check it out. There is a ton of information to know about how humanity wants to map the Earth in weird ways. All of that just to say that's what's going into this decision right here, is what grid are you using as your reference? Moving back into more of the tangible realms of, all right, we have our iPad, we're just trying to get set up in the field, do this once so we don't have to do it again. This is where you go back to configuring that external receiver. You've done your Bluetooth connection between your iPad and your receiver, but now you need to tell Field Maps, hey, this guy's legit. You can go ahead and take your location data from him. This is under the provider category. Field Maps will default to using the integrated. Again, that's just built-in GPS in your iPad, which is not worth anything, not even a hand sandwich when it comes to our field data collection. From here, if you've already connected, you have to toggle this and choose the connected receiver. If you don't see anything here, that means it didn't pair correctly in the Bluetooth. So you got to go back a couple steps and make sure that they're talking to each other. Antenna height is an optional setting that we do still recommend. It just means what is the height of the receiver device. Sometimes you've got a device on a pole, like if you're doing total station work, or somebody has a high-end Trimble and they've got one of the pole features. That might be at 2 meters. Usually, if you have an antenna height of 0, that means you're setting the device on the ground. Most commonly, you're going to have it in your backpack or your pocket. Put in an estimation. I'm 6 feet tall, so if I had it under my hat, I'd maybe put it at 2 meters. If I've got it in my pocket or my backpack, maybe 1.25. This mostly impacts when it's trying to record its elevation accurately. Having that height does matter. If you're a tall green bean person like me, an additional 2 meters has a significant impact on elevation rating. If you're swapping devices with a tall or small buddy, maybe just double check your antenna height. Now we continue into our efforts to make sure our data is as accurate as possible. This is about as technical as it gets when it gets into our data collection. But the whole reason we're using this app is so that when we report datum locations, isolates, site boundaries to SHPO, it's as accurate as we can make it for future revisits and cultural protection. This part of GPS averaging just means how many satellites need to be involved when I'm trying to collect data. The way your receiver is getting its location is by pinging various satellites that are in orbit. The more samples it has, and we're just going to statistics here, the more precise and accurate it's going to be. Here's where you tell your device what your minimum qualifications are. When you turn on GPS averaging, that just means I don't want you to take the first point that you get. I want you to double check it against a couple different satellites. If you've ever stood in place and just watched your blue dot on a map move around you in weird circles, that's what's happening. It's getting a different location from different satellites, and that's why it's doing its little dance. And you're like, I'm not even moving. Is this thing possessed? No, it's just communicating with giant satellites way off in space, and it's getting a little confused. GPS averaging means, hey, do your little dance and then take the average of that to get your best average location based on how many satellites. Here, when we're talking about points to average, that means how many times did it ping a satellite? We recommend 8 to 10. That being said, that's not realistic on all projects. If you're deep in canyon country or dense vegetation, satellite coverage is rough. So you may have to adjust this based on line of sight, horizon lines, the reality of where you're working. That's what this whole setting is about, is how many times you need to ping a satellite to get a reliable location. As a note, you'll see this in action when you're collecting data, because as you're collecting, it will report how many things it's averaging. So if it's taking a long time, so here in this sample, say it was set to 5, and I'm sitting there in the field and it's been stuck on 2 for like a solid minute, that probably tells me there's not a lot of satellites up there for me to connect to, so maybe I need to adjust this. If this is too high and it's just lagging on you, the app will not collect a point until it reaches this minimum. Knowing that this setting is here, we like to highlight it because, again, say you were handed an iPad that somebody else configured and you don't understand, you're like, I asked you to take a point about 5 minutes ago. What's the holdup? Look at these settings. That will give you some information on maybe you're asking it for some really specific information and that needs to be adjusted. The other way that your device looks for its location information is by streaming. This is also called the breadcrumb method. When you want it to do a breadcrumb, say you're walking a dirt road or you're recording a site boundary and you've tucked the receiver in your backpack and you're hiking around the boundary. How often do you want it to drop breadcrumbs? This setting, you can do it by time or distance. So you can do it by every couple of seconds or a certain unit of measurement like 2 meters. Again, the more specific you're asking it to be, the heavier the satellite reading needs to be. If you're asking it for one every single second, that might be difficult in some terrain areas. But these options are both here so you can adjust them to best fit where you're working. If you're out on the plains or somewhere with a clear horizon, usually you can get away with having these pretty intense. But if you're in canyon or ravines or deep vegetation, you'll need to give them some more grace. They're going to do their best for you. We're not yet free of the accuracy game. There's one more setting to make sure a specific level of data quality. We have these fancy external receivers that some of them are like thousands of dollars a piece, and they can record to say maybe sub-meter accuracy. But this makes sure, this setting, accuracy says, what is your bare minimum to get you to swipe right on this data? When you set this accuracy, you say, hey, I will not accept anything that is less accurate than 2 meters or half a meter. This is where, even though your fancy receiver can go down to that level, if it's not configured to double check itself, it may wreck itself. But you want to double check, what am I asking of you? What level is acceptable? And again, once you set this, you don't have to do it again. Here, for example, is what you'll see. Say we put it at 2 meters because that's what the client needs. Your device then will not take a point that does not meet that standard. This is where your quality assurance comes in, is with this setting. It will refuse to take a point. Again, that may not be okay for a certain biome.
In addition to creating our data and editing it as far as attribute tables, there's one more key component that field users and project managers to be aware of, and that is how to track the accuracy of your geospatial data standard, something that declares how accurate data, when we say submit it to SHPO or BLM or USGS, they have very spatial requirements for how accurate that data is. Sometimes it can be within more or less 2 meters, or sometimes it's very specifically needs to be sub-meter. We went through all that effort of configuring our device to make sure our iPad is paired with our external receiver. This is how, once you make sure it's actually doing what you want, or if you tweak or configure your configuration settings because you're not the level of accuracy you require. Before we dive into how to these fields, a quick note is that these data fields, which just mean information about your data, are limited. You cannot get these currently on lines and polygons. That is of the limitation there is on these split-second calculations. These metadata are determined communicating with the satellites, getting their accuracy of what is being communicated between satellites up in space down here on Earth. Plus, you're doing some very cool space archaeology. With the point, it is a one snapshot. Whereas if we were trying to track this level of accuracy lines and polygons, it would need to do all this calculation for every single breadcrumb remaining. At the end, we'll go over like a quick strategy for how could you possibly do 4 lines and polygons. But first, we'll go over what are these metadata fields, what are they trying to tell you, and how do they relate to those configurations we went over earlier. So the first one you're going to be looking at is called position source. This could be the fader if the field is correctly configured to use the device you want, and to configuration, it could read one of the following. The first one, this happens, generally speaking, as an error. It cannot communicate and it can't figure out where it's actually pulling it.
Different federal and state
later, perhaps, if you have GIS come in and add something to your web map, it may ping as unknown. User defined is another thing. This is where if you as a user have manually drawn a point on the map, you utilize the blue dot option or the use my location. User defined means you were looking at your map, you held your finger left here instead of use my location. So in that case, it cannot pull out any accuracy data because it's just relying on you to location provider. It means it is using internal GPS of your device. Now, in the case of if you have a company iPad that's paired with an external receiver, and we'll get more later. However, if you're using a high accuracy device that has its own receiver, it may read and create its own GPS system very high accuracy. So you may see this one frequently depending on what device your PISM team uses. Now, external GNSS receiver is going to be the one that the majority company will likely means is indeed pulling from a unit that you have paired to your main device, aka like your iPad. A network location provider, we don't see this one. It can populating something like an RTK system. So that may come to focus as our company expands what sort of GPS we utilize for our fieldwork. And all of them will be automatically filled in based on your configuration. The next field you'll want to look at is the receiver name. So this pairs with to give you a specific name of the device providing the GPS coordinates. So this is where if yours says integrated location provider and the receiver name says iPad or iPhone, that means the app is not utilizing your Bluetooth receiver. So you need to go back to settings and change from internal to your GPS device. So the receiver name is really your ticket to identify is actually using the device I want it to use. This is the one that people should be checking the most just to make sure brackets. Pulling sets are the actual accuracy fields that you can use to determine are you within the range you want to. Again, for generic, mark where your truck is or your lunch spot, or maybe a property issue, maybe accuracy isn't as much of a concern. When we have to say reports to the agency in our final delivery, it's just something for your team. Whereas with a cultural or paleontological source data, these accuracy fields are more important that you are getting the level of accuracy you need. So you have kind of two. The first one is horizontal and vertical accuracy. These are always in meters. Reflect the accuracy of your individual point. Vertical is the accuracy of the point's elevation, its Z value, while horizontal accuracy refers to the accuracy of the point's location on the ground. Generally speaking, most of our agency submissions are concerned with horizontal accuracy rather than vertical accuracy, but it's still good to keep an eye on both and make sure they're within the established for your project. Now, very similarly, there are also two other fields. If your device configuration requires the use of averaged points, back to slide 16, these it's taking the average of horizontal and vertical accuracy from several points. Why they're accompanied by another field called averaged position, which tells you how many were used to average out that point. So say, for example, you're in the field and you just see going left and right all over. Sometimes folks will they're like, okay, I'm going to stay in the same spot. And if you're just taking the first point, whereas if you're using GPS averaging, you could then instead see those three points and take their average centralized reach. And going back to our configuration settings, how many satellites you must have before it takes. And so by looking at this averaged positions field, you can see what's being met. Say you're like, hey, I don't want average point with anything less than 5 satellites. You could see if it's taking 5 or if it's 6, 7, 8 to get a better confidence in accuracy from that GPS average system. So these are kind of like the 4 main fields that you want to be looking at when QCing your data, either live in the field when you're done. We do, though, recommend that you look at these as you're collecting your data, because as we'll see at the next, we're going to go over, look at it actually in the app in ArcGIS Online. We recommend people review these fields while you're out in the field, because this actually cannot be fixed by anything but retaking the configuration setting or an improved satellite connection, whatever the problem is. There is no way to fix it. We have definitely had horror stories where teams have been out in the field for months and then after the fact reviewed the data and realized almost none of it was within the level of accuracy that, say, a federal climber, and they had to go back and do all of that field, and that's just awful. Nobody's to go through. If you're checking these fields just really quick as you're generating them, you have confidence in that you're not going to need source because Bluetooth connection glitched and it took connection to the Juniper or the Trimble. Within the field maps, screenshots of what it makes a point that you've collected. Now again, these accuracy you're populated or generated after you've selected the point, because it needs you to actually say, yes, okay, this is where I want to do all its mathematical calculation. So to review these, the first thing you do is select the point we're just working, and then you can scroll to review these fields. For sanity's sake, GIS teams things at the very end, so that way as you're reviewing more important stuff, the resource ID or the type or anything like these additional fields that you don't really need to focus. But this metadata packed with like 12 different attributes, and we don't want folks having to scroll through that over and over again to get things like feature ID. So these tend to be, and so you'll scroll down a little and looking for those 4 key areas. So here in these snapshots, you can see what the type field might look like and receive for some correctly gathered data. So here is the external GIS receiver, and that receiver name is one of the Juniper. Now each device, so say your crew has 2 Jupers or 2 SX active, they do each have their own unique serial number, which should be appearing in. So you'll be able to Unix, you can collect this point on the receiver. Looking a little bit down this chart, you can see where we have the horizontal accuracy. On the right-hand screenshot, where is in GPS averaging, and so you get an example of looks when the average horizontal and vertical accuracy missed. They had 8 satellites connect, and they took the point. So that standard deviation is pretty low, and that's a pretty solid data collect. 2 examples of what it looks like when your receiver is correctly connected, 2 different kinds of configurations, numbers provided here, well under some meter. That's very, very good. Folks who are maybe project managers who are keeping an eye on things, you can also look like in your browser and step. To access these, as always, go to your web map and point layer. In this case, we're using an example of a cultural. From that layer, go ahead and open the options by clicking the little 3-dot button to the right of the layer. From drop-down menu, you'll just select Show Table. This is how you get to a table of any layer. For an easier view, we do recommend click that last button, which looks like the 2 arrows stacked on top of it, and that will help increase or decrease the size of the table pop. I know if computer screens for too long, your eyes just get real tired of squinting at this itty little table. Be a friend to your eyes to a comfortable size. Once you have, you're just like field maps, you're just going to be scrolling down to look at those various hefty metadata fields, and that's where you review things like the receiver name, position source, and the various accurate. Now, a quick tip for working in ArcGIS Online, if you just want to do a very quick QC to see, hey, do we have any problem children data? Anything that's, say here, for example, we can see 2 points that were collected, one from an iPad and then one as user define. For any field in ArcGIS Online, you have 2 up-down arrows to the right of the field to toggle between for numeric fields. This toggles between high and high to low, and for text alphabetical. So, for example, you were concerned about anybody utilizing an iPad receiver instead to clear their data. You could arrow receiver and just sort until all names are grouped together, and then scroll through, find anything out of the order. Similar, if you want to very quickly see if anything outside of established spatial standards, pull that and look for the highest values in your. And that way you can start coordinating with your field team and identify any points of concern before they come back from it.
It's even simpler. You select your grouper, and then instead of hovering over vertex, you just drag and drop into the table and start entering your information. Some fields may have drop-down options, and those are curated from office to office, or it may just be a free text entry or a date field, something like that. Again, once you have these, you're just going to hit submit in the top right-hand corner, and that saves your changes. If you're like, never mind, I don't want these submitted, you hit cancel, and none of those changes are applied. Sometimes you're like, you save something, and you're like, oh shoot, I didn't mean to do that. Maybe you deleted a boundary, or maybe you completely changed the geometry only to realize, wait, no, this is modern, not a historic site. Too late, you hit submit and it's there, and you can't go back and revisit. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's as simple as going back out, re-recording it, or maybe somebody else is coming back that way from their transect or something like that and communicating with your team. But if it's something more serious, there are some recovery options. For example, for your edits to become permanent, again, you do have to hit submit. If you need to back out before then, you can. And that applies to online and offline. If you're in offline mode, once you submit the edit, it's now permanent on your device. If, say, you're like, hey, it's not safe for me to sync back up because I'll ruin someone else's work or I'll delete something critical, talk with your field director or your project manager. They can coordinate with GIS, and we do have some recovery efforts at our disposal. They're clunky, they require signals and access to a laptop, so they're not ideal, but there are some backup options. If you ever do wind up in a data critical situation, get us in the loop. We'll figure out what we can do for you. For that one funny but terrifying caveat was somebody accidentally deleted an entire project's worth of data. Months of fieldwork was just gone, but somebody happened to have an offline area still on their iPad, so we could restore the entire project from that one person. It was terrifying. We figured out how that happened and fixed it, but the fear in everyone's souls at the loss of 6 months of fieldwork, it was real.
In addition to creating our data and editing it as far as geometry and attribute tables, there's one more key component that field users and project managers need to be aware of, and that is how to track the accuracy of your field data. We've mentioned already that a number of agencies have certain geospatial data standards, something that declares how accurate data has to be when we say submit it to SHPO or BLM or USGS. They have very specific geospatial requirements for how accurate that data is. Sometimes it can be within more or less 2 meters, or sometimes it very specifically needs to be sub-meter accuracy. We went through all that effort of configuring our device to make sure our iPad is paired with our external receiver. This is how, once you've done all that hard work, you can make sure it's actually doing what you want. Or if you need to tweak or configure your configuration settings because you're not getting the level of accuracy you require. Before we dive into how to check these fields, a quick note is that these metadata fields, which just means information about your data, are limited to point layers. You cannot get these currently on lines and polygons. That is just a reflection of the limitation there is on these split-second calculations. These metadata are determined by communicating with the satellites, getting their accuracy of what is being communicated between the satellites up in space and your device down here on Earth, unless you're doing some very cool space archaeology. With the point, it is a one-point snapshot, whereas if we were trying to track this level of accuracy with lines and polygons, it would need to do all this mathematical calculation for every single breadcrumb while you were streaming. At the end, we'll go over a quick strategy for how could you possibly track some accuracy for lines and polygons. But first, we'll go over what are these metadata fields, what are they trying to tell you, and how do they relate to those configuration settings we went over earlier. Well, the first one you're going to be looking at is called position source type. This could be the first indicator if the Field Maps app is correctly configured to use the device you want, and depending on the configuration, it could read one of the following. The first one is unknown. This happens, generally speaking, as an error if the device and your iPad just cannot communicate and it can't figure out where it's actually pulling its GPS data from, or later perhaps if you have GIS come in and add something later to your web map. It may ping as unknown. User defined is another common one. This is where if you as a user have manually drawn a point on the map rather than saying utilize the blue dot option or the use my location, user defined means you were looking at your map, you held your finger down, you said collect here instead of use my location. In that case, it cannot fill out any accuracy data because it's just relying on you to declare where you put that point. Integrated or system location provider means it is using the internal GPS of your device. Now, in the case of if you have a company iPad that's paired with an external receiver, this one's the red flag, and we'll get into that more later. However, if you're using a high accuracy device that has its own receiver, say like a Trimble unit, it may read integrated location provider because that device, its own GPS system is very high accuracy. But you may see this one frequently depending on what kind of device your office and team uses. External GNSS receiver is going to be the one that the majority of our company will likely see. This means it is indeed pulling from an external unit that you have paired to your main device, aka like your iPad. A network location provider, we don't see this one as option, but it can pop up when you're utilizing something like an RTK system. That may come more into focus as our company expands what sort of GPS networks and devices we utilize for our fieldwork. All of those will be automatically filled in based on your configuration and your device. The next key field you'll want to look at is the receiver name. So this pairs with position source type to give you a specific name of the device providing the GPS coordinates. This is where if yours says integrated location provider and the receiver name says iPad or iPhone, that means the Field Maps app is not utilizing your Bluetooth receiver. So you need to go back to configuration settings and change from internal to your GPS device. The receiver name is really your ticket to identifying, is my workflow actually using the device I want it to use? This is the one that people should be checking the most just to make sure it's pulling from where it should be. The next two sets are the actual accuracy fields that you can use to determine are you within the range you want to be. Again, for generic things like marking where your truck is or your lunch spot, or maybe a property access issue, maybe accuracy isn't as much of a concern because that's not something we have to report to the agencies in our final deliverables. It's just something that's useful for your team. Whereas with cultural or paleontological resource data, these accuracy fields become much more important in ensuring that you are getting the level of accuracy you need. You have two pairs. The first one is horizontal and vertical accuracy. These are always in meters. These reflect the accuracy of your individual point. Vertical accuracy refers to the accuracy of the point's elevation, its z-value, while horizontal accuracy refers to the accuracy of the point's location on the ground. Generally speaking, most of our agency submission requirements are concerned with horizontal accuracy rather than vertical accuracy, but it's still good to keep an eye on both and make sure they're within the established parameters for your project requirements. Now, very similarly, there are also two other fields called average horizontal and average vertical accuracy. If your device or configuration requires the use of averaged points, so going back to slide 16, these fields will be populated instead. It's taking the average of horizontal and vertical accuracy from several points, which is why they're accompanied by another field called averaged positions, which tells you how many satellites were used to average out that point. Say, for example, you're in the field and you just see your little blue dot going left and right all over. Sometimes folk will do these little tests where they're like, okay, I'm going to stay in the same spot. I'm going to record the point 3 times and you get 3 different locations. That might happen if you're just taking the first point you get. Whereas if you're using GPS averaging, you could then instead see those 3 different points and take their average centralized location. Again, going back to our configuration settings, you can set a requirement for how many satellites you must have before it takes a point. And by looking at this averaged positions field, you can see if that requirement is being met. Say you're like, hey, I don't want you to average a point with anything less than 5 satellites. You could see if it is taking 5 or if it's 6, 7, 8 to get a better confidence in what your accuracy is from that GPS averaging system. These are kind of like the 4 main fields that you want to be looking at when you're QCing your data, either live in the field or when you're done for field work for the day. We do, though, recommend that you look at these as you're collecting your data, because as we'll see at the next slide, we're going to go over to how to look at it actually in the app in ArcGIS Online. We recommend people review these fields while you're out in the field because this accuracy cannot be fixed by anything but retaking the point with either a better configuration settings or an improved satellite connection, whatever the problem may be. There is no way to fix it. We have unfortunately definitely had horror stories where teams have been out in the field for months and then after the fact reviewed the data and realized almost none of it was within the level of accuracy that, say, a federal client required. And they had to go back out and redo all that field work. And that's just awful. Nobody wants to go through that. If you're checking these fields just really quickly as you're generating them, you can have confidence in that you're not going to need to go back out and do a site revisit or a resource revisit just because your Bluetooth connection glitched and it dropped its connection to the Juniper or the Trimble unit. Within the FieldMats app, here we have a couple of screenshots of what it may look like when you are looking at a point that you've collected. Again, these accuracy fields are only populated or generated after you finish collecting the point because it needs you to actually say, yes, okay, this is where I want it before it can do all its mathematical calculations. To review these, the first thing you do is just select the point that you were just working on, and then you can scroll down to review these fields. For sanity's sake, GIS teams tend to put these at the very end, so that way as you're reviewing more important stuff like the resource ID or the type or anything like that, there are a lot of additional fields that you don't really need to focus on, but this metadata package can come with like 12 different attribute fields, and we don't want folks having to scroll through that over and over again to get to the things like feature IDs. So these tend to be at the end, so you'll scroll down a little bit and then you're looking for those 4 key areas that we were just discussing. Here in these snapshots, you can see what the position source type field might look like and receiver name for some correctly gathered data. Here you can see it's the external GNSS receiver, and that receiver name is one of the Junipers. Now each device, so say your crew has 2 Junipers or 2 SX Blues active, they do each have their own unique serial number, which should be appearing in here. You'll be able to see if you know who has what unit, you can even tell who collected this point based on the receiver ID. Looking a little bit further down the snapshots, you can see where we have the horizontal accuracy. On the right is a second screenshot where somebody was using GPS averaging. And so you can see an example of what that looks like when the averaged and horizontal and vertical accuracy with, in this case, they had 8 satellites connected when they took the point. So that standard deviation is pretty low, and that's a pretty solid data collection. These are 2 examples of what it looks like when your receiver is correctly connected, 2 different kinds of styles of configuration, and the numbers provided here are well under some meter. That's some very, very good data. For folks who are back at the office, maybe project managers who are keeping an eye on things, you can also review your field data in ArcGIS Online. Here are some snapshot examples of what that will look like in your browser environment instead. To access these, as always, go to your web map and find your point layer of interest. In this case, we're using an example of a cultural point layer. And from that layer, go ahead and open the options by clicking the little 3-dot button to the right of the layer name. From the drop-down menu, you'll just select Show Table. This is how you get to the attribute table of any layer. For an easier view, we do recommend click that expand or collapse button. It looks like the 2 arrows stacked on top of each other, and that will help increase or decrease the size of the table pop-up. I know when you stare at computer screens for too long, your eyes just get real tired of squinting at this itty-bitty little table, so be a friend to your eyes, expand that to a comfortable size. Once you have the table, just like within field maps, you're just going to be scrolling down to look at those various fields. In this case, you scroll to the right to get to the end batch of all these hefty metadata fields, and that's where you can review things like the receiver name, position source type, and the various accuracy fields. A quick tip for working in ArcGIS Online: if you just want to do a very quick QC to see, hey, do we have any problem children data? Anything that slipped into, say here, for example, we can see 2 points that were collected, one from an iPad and then one as user defined. For any attribute field in ArcGIS Online, you can use the 2 little up-down arrows to the right of the field name to toggle between sorting each of these fields. So for numeric fields, this toggles between low to high and high to low. And for text fields, it toggles between alphabetical or reverse alphabetical order. If, for example, you were concerned about anybody utilizing an iPad receiver instead to collect their data, you could double-click that arrow beside receiver name and just sort until all of the names are grouped together, and then scroll through to find anything out of the ordinary. Similarly, in the horizontal accuracy field, if you want to very quickly see if anything is outside of your established spatial standards, you can toggle that and look for the highest values in your table. And that way you can start coordinating with your field team and identify any points of concern that may need to be retaken before they come back from the field.
Somebody accidentally deleted an entire project's worth of data. Months of fieldwork was just gone. But somebody happened to have an offline area still on their iPad, so we could restore the entire project from that one person. It was terrifying. We figured out how that happened and fixed it, but the fear in everyone's souls at the loss of 6 months of fieldwork, it was real. So that's our data collection. We'll kind of breeze through a couple more additional tools that will help working in the field and your recordings a bit easier before continuing on. Going back to our interface, we kind of touched on some of these at the very beginning. I'll highlight a few more of them. So here is our menu button, again, where you can access a bunch of things like bookmarks, legends, markups, all these kinds of stuff. So to start with, the legend is a tool that tells you what the symbols in your map and your template mean. If you're looking at a blue boundary or a green line and you don't know what that's supposed to be, the legend will tell you. Bookmarks allow you to create custom views so you can revisit places in your map. Say you're tired of trying to pan back in and out of the same areas or trying to remember where that one particular site was. You can just bookmark it and then navigate that. Those are unique to your device, so you can't share your bookmarks with folks, but for your own purposes, if you're in the field, bookmarks can be really, really nice when you just need to hop between key locations. My Places is something similar. Rather than a bookmark, it's more of a point. So those are, again, saved on your device. You just drop a pin, save it to My Places as kind of a personal reference. This is not data collection, so don't use this for, hey, I found a fragment, or here's a shirt, or here's an isolate. No. That goes in your actual data collection layers. But if you need to remember where your lunch spot or your vehicle is, a little pin place is perfect for that. Our measure tool. Pretty self-explanatory. You can do feet and area, you can do length and area. The units of measurement go all the way back to that start when we configured our units of measurement. That's how you can change these. Edit multiple is another tool you do have, but be careful with this one. I highlight it because it can go quite squirrely if you're not familiar with how it works. Edit multiple lets you edit multiple things at once, changing their tabular data at a single time, so you don't have to enter the same thing over and over and over and over again if you need to make a global change to stuff. But once you click submit, you'd have to manually edit them to reverse any changes. This is more useful for, say, maybe you need to update the recorder ID and put in your name for all of the points that you gathered that day. This is a great tool for that. But if you wanted to update individual ID tags, like a feature or site ID of many items, this is not the tool for you. Do that one by one. So play around with this one on like some practice data before using it live in the field. We've just have reports that it's all too easy to hit submit before you realize the enormity of your actions, and then you're very sad. Just a small caveat, it can be very handy, but great power, be careful. The last tool is markup. This one is, again, more just for workflow. It's not for data collection. It's the equivalent of, say you had your project map printed out and you want to scribble some notes on it. Like, oh, you know what, maybe I'll survey here tomorrow, or here's my lunch spot. This is just graphic doodling on your field maps. Again, this is not data. Please don't try to record anything in here. It's just for your personal notes. They also can't be synced or shared to other users, so it's really just for you. But it's a quick little drawing tool that can be handy if you need to scribble something down Or say, for example, you want to send a screenshot to a client or a project manager proposing a site boundary. You can zoom in, you can sketch like, hey, what if we extend it out this way? Or I think there's a disturbance over here. It's really good for kind of like screenshot notes, if you will. Those are all the different features that you might run into while you're out there collecting data, but how you collect that data can be different depending on what office you're working for. So of course, this training is for our Colorado team, but we have several teams within Colorado. Our data collection templates that we use in field maps are curated office by office. And just like each SHPO has different reporting requirements, the data collection templates we use reflect that. They may have different fields, different default options to suit their specific state or federal or office requirements. And some offices might even have more than one. Spoiler alert, Colorado has 3. So if part of the key to success in using these is making sure you understand the differences between them or what's expected in one template versus another. When you have questions, talk to your field director, talk to your project manager and your office staff. They're the ones who are going to be able to help guide you in what is expected for the difference between a generic line versus a non-cultural line, a survey polygon versus a cultural polygon, all this kind of stuff. If you have questions about that, do chat with your office staff. Somebody like John and Jen and Tim, any of your Colorado overlords will be able to help you with those. When you're getting to know a template, here are some thoughts and ideas for you to dive into, to ask yourself questions to make sure you do feel confident and comfortable working with a template. So here's our kind of Colorado sampler example. As I mentioned, we've got 3, 2 for culture and 1 for paleontology. We have 1 for the Ignacio team, the cultural projects, and 1 for the Denver team. And then we also have a paleontology data dictionary, which is, some people say data dictionary, some will say data template. They're kind of the same thing. What it means is it's a specific set of layers that will show up in field maps for every single project run by that team. So whenever the paleo team heads out, they know they're going to be using these exact same layers. Whenever the Denver cultural team knows they're heading out, they're going to see these same layers. Same for Ignacio, same for Utah, Nevada, Florida, architectural teams. They all have a special selection of layers and fields. So once you get to know it, you can rely that it's going to be consistent every single time. And you don't have to spend as much time relearning things and worrying that it's going to be different the next time you go out in the field. In general, these templates are broken for our industry, are broken into like layers meant for recording cultural features, for tracking survey progress, and then more generic or like out of period impacts like landscape features or modern disturbances, that kind of stuff. So you'll see those trends pretty similar between multiple offices and their cultural teams. Within those, you will have different kinds of geometry, typically a point, a line, and a polygon. Again, if you're doing a boundary, you want a polygon. If you're just doing a fence line, you want a line. If you're doing a datum, you want a point. And so a template group, things like cultural features, survey features, testing features, they may have one of each geometry type in it to reflect the kind of thing you're recording. Like for a generic disturbance, you may need a polygon for like an entirely bulldozed area, but you may just want a line for like a fire break or a point for a modern hearth or a trash dump. So these different geometries are just there to be used to reflect the best representation of the data that you're talking about. So when it comes to understanding like your regional standards, yes, a key part is growing familiar with the data layer templates that you're going to be using. And again, can't stress enough, chat with your office staff, see if they have training materials, can do additional training walkthroughs on what's expected, all that kind of stuff. But there's some other things that are more qualitative or workflow oriented that are also still good to know when you're working in field maps. The most basic one is, how do I log in? We get this question quite a bit. The short version is each office manages its credentials. So if you don't know how to log into the app, reach out to your team. Regional passwords do change fairly regularly for security purposes. So always be in contact with your office staff to figure out what the credentials are for your project. Again, reference materials. Do they have any training guidelines to help you orient yourself with their template and the layers and the required data entry? Things like naming conventions also can vary from office to office. Is there a specific way that like site and feature IDs need to be recorded? And we're talking everything from like, okay, do we use leading zeros and hyphens or not? That kind of stuff. Those are things that your office team are best suited to answer those questions so you can be consistent with their expectations. And then along the line, also QC, like for your role, what's expected when you're double checking your data? Some people are like at higher level, may have like the dedicated, it's their job, like your crew chief, to go and review all the data for the field season, or there may be certain things that each field tech is expected to do. Find out what that is. And that kind of transitions nicely into our post field. We've done all this field data collection, and now what do we do at the end of it? So for the first part is, of course, sharing all your hard work. You got to sync your changes. So once you're done for the day and you're back at base camp, the office, maybe you have a Starlink set up, whatever that may be, basically you're back in your Wi-Fi bubble, whatever that looks like. Then you can sync your edits. To do this, there's this handy little download upload button. A dot will appear for whatever category is awaiting you. So if you have changes that need to be shared, you'll see a dot beneath the upload or sync button. If somebody else has changes and you need to download those to your device, the little dot will appear above the download button. You may have both, which is going to be pretty common if you're working with other folks on the same project. You'll need to be sharing your edits. So you just click this download upload button to start the process, and it creates this pop-up, which will give you a breakdown of all the changes on your device that you need to make. These are listed on your pending edits. This is basically like your final shot list to verify, like, okay, these are all the things I recorded. Do you want to make any changes to them? Is anything missing? So here, for any of these, you can click on one and go back into that editing screen. It'll zoom to the item of interest. You can update geometry, you can update the table, and here is your full list of everything that you're about to share with everybody else. If you want to cancel any of these, again, you can just click on it, say this site boundary or this cultural poly is not correct. I can click on it, I can say cancel and remove this from my list of edits. Then once I'm ready to go, I just hit the big old blue sync button, and voila, they go on their merry way into the cloud with all the other beautiful GIS data. And once again, you're never free of QC. But no, in all lightness, again, QC expectations do vary from team to team. So can't stress enough, coordinate with your office and your project staff to figure out what's expected. This slide provides some like baseline samples of what's pretty common for everybody to do. And it really results in like, okay, what's happening to your data after you're done with the field? This goes on to live many lives in the form of site sketch maps, boundary analysis, ship out or federal agency data submissions, all this kind of stuff. So you might be looking for everything like, hey, did everything I record actually make it into my sync? Do I actually have IDs assigned to stuff? Does something just look weird? Like maybe we're recording a road and for some reason there's like a vertex way off. And you're like, that's not right. Maybe like the satellite jumped or something like that. Or maybe, you scribbled a thought of, oh, hey, yeah, I should record this feature in markup, and then realize, oh, wait, crap, I actually need to record that in the actual data. These are just some samples of stuff that you can bear in mind when you're going through end of the day or end of the session to kind of like look at and review your data. Now, of course, all of this is under the assumption that, sweet, you've gotten to know the application, all the buttons, how to collect it, what to do within your project, but realistically, something is going to go wrong at some point. If you don't, please let me know. That's a marvelous secret, and I would love to study under you. So just tell me whenever you have a perfect experience. That'd be great. But realistically, you're in the field, something's going wrong. And what do? The first thing is we actually need to try and figure out specifically what part in the numerous devices that you've been handed and carrying through the field all week, which one's actually the problem child. So in this case, it's usually one of four main culprits. We have, of course, the iPad, the Field Maps app. Maybe it's a specific layer in your map, or it's your external receiver. Trying to figure out which one of those is the problem is going to be the first step to figure out who to talk to and how to fix it. Other things that are helpful to consider is it an isolated incident? AKA, are you the technology gremlin's favorite victim of the day? Or is everybody else doing just sunshine and rainbows and only your device seems to be cursed? Or is it a group problem and everyone's miserable about the same thing? That is also very useful information to have. Similarly, for field maps, is it a specific login? Maybe your office has multiple logins, like the Phoenix 1, Phoenix 2 are very common. If you switch logins, does the problem go away or does it get worse? That's another useful piece of information to have. Now, again, depending on our problem child answer, that's going to impact what tech support team you're reaching out to for help on this. If it's your external receiver, you're actually going to be contacting your home office, who may in turn contact an external vendor. Unfortunately, the GIS team and internal tech support just do not have the capacity to troubleshoot all of the breadth of devices that are used across the company. So things like some offices use Trimble, some use Junos, some use Bad Elf, some use SX Blues. That is a lot of technical expertise to have. And unfortunately, our staff just does not have the technical skill set to get into the nitty-gritty of all those devices. Now, that being said, we are happy, and this is more for like PMs, field directors, GIS is happy to help figure out what your tech support options are for those external vendors. A lot of the big ones like Trimble and Juno will have specific tech support lines for their products. We can help you find out if your device is still in warranty, if it's still covered under broad coverage, stuff like that, and like what phone number or email line to contact. We're happy to help you figure that out. But when it comes down to the actual technical troubleshooting, we're going to defer you to whatever expertise that device vendor has. Now, if it's the Field Maps app, absolutely, that's our game. That's what we are here for. So some of those issues might be like, hey, your offline area won't download, or there's not even an option to do so, or you keep trying to sync and it's failing, or a map layer keeps glitching in and out. Anything wrong with the application, 100%, that's what your GIS team is here to help you with. Then the last component being if it's the iPad. We do have an internal like Chronicle Heritage tech support team, which is largely Jeanette Horowitz, who is one of the fleet managers for the iPads. So if you have an iPad issue, like maybe the Field Maps app just straight isn't on the device, or your cell card isn't connecting correctly, or the iPad won't update, something like that, the internal company tech support is there to help with iPad specific issues. So you can see it could be any number of things. It could be all three, and you just have a lovely fruit basket of people to talk to about a whole ton of problems. But this hopefully will give you a better sense of who do you talk to for different kinds of issues, which of course leads to like, what is the issue? You now know, okay, it's the app or it's the device, and you know who to contact, but you still need to be able to describe the problem. And sometimes you might be able to resolve it yourself. Strong caveat that, of course, you are always welcome to reach out for help, but we also know you got stuff to do. So here are some common culprits and suspects and resolutions that we've put together that people do run into pretty regularly. The first most common culprit is low signal or poor internet connection. And you see that manifesting in like maps not downloading, sync attempts failing, the app timing out, stuff like that. Extreme temperatures is another very common one because people are working in alpine regions, they're working in the desert. Frost and freeze and heat are all terrible impacts on iPads and external receivers. So if your device is just shutting down, screen's blacking out, battery won't charge, it could be an environmental issue. Data accuracy stuff, basically like you're collecting a point and showing way off kilter, that's probably an external receiver issue. So looking at like maybe it's the configuration settings, or it could be topography blocking satellite connections. You could do everything right in that wealth of configuration slides and still not get a good signal because you're in a canyon or you're in a ravine or there's dense tree coverage. There are some things, sadly, we just cannot surmount, and tough environment is sometimes one of those. Or it could be as simple as your user credentials aren't working. Maybe the password changed recently, or honestly, a lot of times it might just be a typo. Explore all of these options to see if maybe any of them can help resolve. And if not, try our IT 101 little checklist. This is something that when you contact GIS or internal tech support, we're probably going to walk you through anyway. So if you want to do it in advance, save some time, rock on. And it is as simple as like checking if anything needs a software update, meaning the Field Maps app, your iPad, your external receiver, if it does that. Making sure everything is up to specs will help them operate more smoothly. And the much beloved, have you tried turning it off and on again? Yes, it's basic, but a lot of times it works. Even your computers and your GPSs need a nap. So try restarting. Forgive me for saying it, but yeah, it's a good one to try, and we'll probably have you try it each time you talk to us, not to lean into the cliche too much. And lastly, also sign back in and out of the app. Sometimes Esri, that overlord of the GIS software, they'll do like server updates or freezes that cause weird bugs where like you're logged in, you open it up and no maps show up. And you're like, what the what? Sometimes you'll even get like booted out of the app without it actually formally signing you out. And that can be resolved just by officially signing out and logging back in. GIS can help you figure out if it's one of those like external server things that we don't have control over but are giving you grief. But of course, the reality being you've done all the things, you turn it on and off, and everything is still failing. So when that happens, or you just don't want to like deal with it anymore, of course, call in backup. You can contact all of our internal services, so GIS and internal tech support for iPads, either through Service Desk or submitting an email. Submitting the email to this address automatically creates a ticket, so most correspondence will go kind of like to you through email. If you as a field tech do not have access to like a Chronicle Heritage email, you may need your field director or PM or somebody to submit this on your behalf. When you're submitting requests, do make sure you include some vital information like the project number, especially if it's a GIS thing that tells us specifically which map to go and investigate and try to fix. Describe the problem and what steps you've taken so we don't waste your time having you redo stuff that you've already tried. And then also the best way to contact you. We understand you might be in the field, you might be in the office, you might be heading back out the next morning or in 2 days. Let us know what your schedule will look like and how we can contact you. All that being said, fieldwork is fieldwork. So sometimes phone calls and emails just aren't an option. We do understand that, I promise. Sadly, we don't yet have telepathy or teleportation powers yet in our arsenal. So unfortunately, a lot of our troubleshooting and support work does rely on being able to talk to you or get in touch with you through emails or text or Teams or something. We know that's not always realistic. So in that case, of course, talk to your field director and your PM. Figure out what your options are for traveling to somewhere with signal. See, again, is it an isolated incident? Maybe just one device is cursed and you just need to share with others. Like realistically, how can you get by until you're able to communicate with your tech support team? One more tidbit on that is within field maps, you can export things called troubleshooting logs. So if it's an issue with field maps, you can export, it just keeps track of all the activities going on in the app. So here in your profile, if you click troubleshooting and then view logs, it gives you this long scroll of gobbledygook, which is telling you all the activities. This is really valuable to me and my team to help diagnose a specific issue, especially if you're not getting like an error code and it's just straight up failing on you with no notice. This is really valuable, and all it does is export a text file. So you can get that out through a text message, a Teams message, something like lower signal requirement, or you can attach it to an email or anything like that just by clicking this little share icon. So that's one more thing. Again, if all you can do is get out a text message, you can still send this to your PM or somebody back at the office who can contact GIS, whatever it takes for us to be able to try and get in touch with you and get you some help. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for making it. I know this is a ton of information, and I think we are like just at our hour of time, but I still, depending on like folks' schedule and stuff, John, if you want to open it for questions or provide some notes on some of those like Colorado specific things or where folk can get additional resources for working within your team, let me know. So for you guys, this is your little trio of GIS power. You have myself along with 2 other specialists, Jane and Nate. Jane and myself are actually on East Coast time zone hours. The perk of that meaning if it's like 6 a.m. and you're in the field, we're already online. So we are absolutely available to help you guys with the crazy early morning field shenanigans. Nate is based out of Utah, so he's more on the same time zone as you guys. So for end of day items, he is always available as well. So just to give you some names to go with your GIS support.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Sal. Yeah, we're pretty much at our time now. So
forgive me, it's so much information.
Yeah.
I do see that we have a couple questions, so I will be happily to answer those in a follow-up, just so we keep everybody on time.
Yeah, for sure. If anyone wants to stay and ask questions, they can, but I think we can just let people go now. But just as a reminder, we did record this presentation. We'll be saving the PowerPoint on Ignite. So I'll type in the chat where to find that information if people want to refer to it to find some specific information. But other than that, yeah, the GIS team and the cultural team are here and available to answer any questions or help with issues that people are having. But yep, that's about all we got for now.
Dude, yeah, I know it's a ton. So also, if you ever just want to reach out with a question or two, you can always find me or any of my team on Teams or through email or anything like that. So we're always lurking, happy to answer.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. I think that's it. So thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see everyone later.
Take care, y'all.
Thanks, Al.
Of course.